My hands have told the story of my life for 72 years. They are maps of a past spent with lumber, hammers, and saws. The calluses are the cities, the scars are the rivers, and the ingrained lines of honest dirt are the roads I traveled to build a life for my family. I am Arthur, a retired carpenter, and for most of my days, that was a title I wore with quiet pride. It meant I could provide. It meant I could build a home, not just with wood and nails, but with the sweat of my brow and the steadfastness of my love. My wife, Martha, understood that. She would take my rough hands in her soft ones at the end of the day and say they were the kindest hands she had ever known. We didn't have much, but the life we built was as solid as the oak floors I laid in our small house. It was a good life, a real life. We had 2 children, Clara and Liam. Clara was like her mother, full of warmth and a deep, intuitive kindness. She saw the world not for what it could give her, but for what she could give to it. Liam was different. He was sharp, ambitious, with a fire in him to climb higher than the world he was born into. I was proud of that fire. I saw it as a reflection of my own work ethic, just pointed in a different direction. He was the first in our family to go to college. I worked double shifts for years to make sure he had that chance, to make sure his hands would hold pins and briefcases, not hammers and wrenches. I thought I was giving him a better life, a life without the ache in the back and the splinters under the skin. He met Amelia in the city. She was from a world I only saw in magazines. Her family, the Thompsons, had a name that seemed to be etched onto buildings and charity plaques. They had money that was old, quiet, and immense. Liam was swept up in it, and in a way, I couldn't blame him. He started to change in small ways. He'd call less often. When he did visit, he'd subtly correct my grammar or suggest I buy a new brand of shirt. He'd look around our modest home, the one he grew up in, with a look I couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't contempt, not exactly. It was more like embarrassment, as if the very foundation of his childhood was a secret he needed to keep. Then came the wedding announcement. It was going to be a grand affair at a country club where the membership fee was more than I had made in my best year. Martha had been gone for 5 years by then, and the thought of standing there alone, representing our side of the family, filled me with a quiet dread. But my overriding feeling was a deep, fatherly desire to contribute, to show that Liam came from people of substance, even if that substance wasn't monetary. I wanted to stand there, head held high, and know that a piece of me, a piece of his mother's legacy, was part of his new beginning. I didn't have savings to speak of. My pension covered the bills, and not much more. The only thing of value I truly owned, besides the house, was my workshop. It was more than a shed in the backyard. It was my sanctuary, filled with the tools I had collected over a lifetime. Some were passed down from my own father. Each one had a story, a feel, a weight that was familiar and comforting. Selling it felt like selling a part of my own body. But for my son, for his happiness, I decided it was a price I was willing to pay. I sold the lathe, the table saw, the planers, and decades of accumulated cherry, oak, and maple. I sold it all. The man who bought it knew what he was getting. He saw the history in the worn handles and knew their value. The sale brought in just over $50,000. It was a fortune to me, a lifetime of labor converted into a stack of paper. A few days later, I drove to the city and met Liam for lunch. I slid a bank check across the table. "This is for the wedding," I told him, my voice thicker with emotion than I expected. "A gift from your mother and me. Put it toward the venue or the dinner. Whatever you need." Liam stared at the check, his eyes wide. He was speechless for a moment. Then he looked at me, and I saw a flicker of something I mistook for profound gratitude. "Dad, I don't know what to say. This is too much." "Nonsense," I said, waving it off, though my heart was pounding. "A father is supposed to provide. Just know that we're proud of you." I felt a warmth spread through my chest. The sacrifice felt worth it. I had done my part. I had shown my love in the only way I knew how, through tangible, honest effort. The wedding day arrived, a swirl of pastel colors and muted classical music. I felt like a rough-hewn plank in a palace of polished marble. The Thompsons were polite, in a distant, formal way. They introduced me as Amelia's father-in-law, Arthur, my last name an unnecessary detail. I stood by myself for much of the cocktail hour, watching Liam move through the crowd. He looked magnificent in his tailored suit, a man entirely at home in this opulent world. He caught my eye once and gave a small, tight smile before turning back to a conversation with a man who looked like a senator. The reception was where the ground fell out from under me. We were seated for dinner, under a tent that looked like something from a fairy tale, draped in white silk and shimmering with thousands of tiny lights. The champagne was poured, and the toasts began. Amelia's father, Mr. Thompson, stood up. He was a handsome, silver-haired man with a voice as smooth as polished granite. He spoke of love and family and new beginnings. Then he paused, smiling benevolently at Liam and his daughter. "To give these two wonderful young people the perfect start they deserve," he announced, his voice booming with practiced generosity. "My wife and I decided we wanted to take care of everything. We are just so thrilled to have been able to provide this entire wedding, every last cent of it, as our gift to them." The room erupted in applause. People smiled and murmured their approval. I felt the blood drain from my face. I looked at Liam. He was beaming, nodding his head in humble agreement. He caught my eye for a fleeting second, and in that instant, I saw a flicker of panic, of guilt, before it was buried under a mask of joyful gratitude. He looked away quickly. My heart, which had been so full of pride, felt like it had been hit with a sledgehammer. But the final blow was yet to come. It was Liam's turn to speak. He stood, raised his glass, and looked at his bride, then at her parents. "I am the luckiest man in the world," he began, "and I have to thank my incredible new parents, Mr. and Mistress Thompson. Their generosity, their support, it's overwhelming. Thank you for making this dream a reality. We truly couldn't have done this without you." He went on, thanking friends, the wedding party, his beautiful bride. He spoke for 5 minutes. And in those 5 minutes, my name was never mentioned. My contribution was not just ignored, it was deliberately and publicly erased. I wasn't a contributor, I was merely a guest. The $50,000, the gutting of my workshop, the very soul of my life's work, it had vanished into thin air, sacrificed not for his wedding, but for his pride. I sat there, frozen. It wasn't about the money. It was about the lie. He had taken my gift, a gift of pure love and sacrifice, and allowed it to be credited to another man, a wealthier man, to elevate his own status. In that moment, I felt a profound and terrifying invisibility. I was a ghost at my own son's wedding feast, a silent footnote in the story he was telling the world about his new life. The applause for him sounded like dirt being shoveled onto a coffin. My coffin. The pain was a physical thing. It was a cold, sharp-edged stone in my gut. It wasn't the hot burn of anger, not yet. It was the chilling emptiness of betrayal. I felt hollowed out, as if my son had reached inside me and scooped out my history, my meaning, and handed it to someone else to display as their own. Every smiling face, every clinking glass, every note of the joyful music felt like a personal mockery. I had ceased to be his father in that room. I was just an old man in an ill-fitting suit, a relic from a past he was eager to bury. But the lessons of a lifetime spent in patient, methodical work do not desert you in a crisis. I did not make a sound. I did not cause a scene. My body remained perfectly still, a statue of composure. I held my back straight. My hands, those telltale maps of my life, rested on my knees, hidden under the white linen of the tablecloth. I met the occasional glance of a sympathetic stranger with a small, placid smile. To the outside world, I was a proud father, perhaps a bit overwhelmed by emotion. No one could see the demolition taking place inside me. My dignity was the last tool I had left in my box, and I wielded it with quiet desperation. Later in the evening, as the dancing began, my daughter Clara came and sat beside me. She didn't say anything at first, just laid her hand over mine on the table. Her touch was an anchor in the dizzying sea of my hurt. She had her mother's eyes, and right then they were filled with a fierce, sorrowful understanding. "Dad?" she whispered, her voice tight. I heard what Mr. Thompson said. And I heard what Liam didn't say. She squeezed my hand. I know about the workshop. He had no right. Her words were a small point of light in the vast darkness. They didn't fix the wound, but they cleaned it. They told me I wasn't crazy, that what had happened was as wrong as I felt it was. I just nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. I was so grateful for her clarity, for her heart, which was so clearly cut from the same wood as mine and her mother's. The drive home was long and silent. The 3 hours on the highway felt like an eternity spent in a vacuum. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the house was dark and silent. It had never felt so empty. I walked through the rooms, the echoes of my own footsteps accusingly loud. I sat in my armchair, the one Martha had reupholstered twice, and stared out the back window. The yard was dark, but I didn't need to see the empty patch of land where my workshop had stood for 40 years. I could feel its absence. It was a phantom limb, an ache for something that was no longer there. I sat like that for hours as the night deepened. The initial shock, the hollowed-out pain, began to transform. It wasn't melting away. It was hardening. It was cooling and solidifying, like molten steel being forged into something new. It became a quiet, unshakable resolve. Liam hadn't made a mistake. He hadn't forgotten. He had made a choice. He had weighed my sacrifice against the approval of his wealthy in-laws, and he had chosen them. He had chosen the lie because the truth made him feel small. An act that deliberate, that deeply cutting, could not be met with silence. It could not be met with angry words, either. Anger was a fire that burned itself out. This required something more permanent, something as quiet and as undeniable as the truth itself. By the time the first gray light of dawn touched the window pane, I knew what I had to do. My response would not be loud. It would not be vengeful. It would be an act of restoration. I would simply put back the truth that he had so carefully removed. On Monday morning, I put on my best church suit, the one I had worn to the wedding. I drove not to my small local bank, but to the main branch downtown, a formidable building of stone and glass. I asked to see the manager. I was calm, my voice steady. In my briefcase, I had the carbon copy of the $50,000 check I had given Liam. I also had my bank statement showing the withdrawal, and I had requested the official image of the cashed check, front and back, which clearly showed Liam's signature on the endorsement line. Next, I called the wedding photographer. I had gotten his business card from the event website. I explained I was the father of the groom and that I wanted to purchase digital copies of a few specific photographs from the toasts. I wanted the one of Mr. Thompson at the podium, his arm outstretched in a gesture of magnanimity. I wanted the one of Liam and Amelia, their faces glowing with adoration as they toasted her parents. I wanted the evidence of the narrative he had chosen. My final stop was a high-end print shop, the kind that did fancy invitations. I spent 2 hours with a young, patient designer, laying out a simple card. It was to be printed on thick, cream-colored cardstock, elegant and understated. On the front, we placed the picture of Liam and Amelia toasting the Thompsons. And on the back, we placed a perfectly clear, high-resolution image of the check. Beneath the image of the check, front and back, with Liam's signature clearly visible, I had them print a single line of text in a simple, dignified font. It read, "A father's love is a quiet gift. Sometimes it needs a receipt. With love, Arthur Miller." Clara had, thankfully, kept a copy of the guest list. I had asked her for it a few days after the wedding, saying I wanted to send a few personal thank you notes to people who had been kind to me. She sent it without a second thought. I took that list and a book of stamps to my dining room table. One by one, I addressed the envelopes. To every guest. To every member of the wedding party. I sent a special one via courier to Mr. Thompson's corporate headquarters, addressed directly to his private office. And finally, I mailed one to Liam and Amelia's new address. It was a quiet, methodical task. Each sealed envelope felt like laying a brick in a foundation that had been shattered. I wasn't tearing anything down. I was rebuilding my own truth. An entire week passed in silence. I went about my days, tending to my garden, tidying the now barren garage. I felt a strange calm, the quiet assurance of a man who has done what needed to be done. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Liam's name. I let it ring 3 times before answering. I didn't say hello. I just waited. The sound that came through the receiver was not a voice. It was a raw, strangled roar of fury. "What did you do?" he screamed, his voice cracking. "What in God's name were you thinking? Are you trying to ruin my life?" I held the phone slightly away from my ear and listened. He raged for several minutes, a torrent of accusations and disbelief. I had humiliated him. I had embarrassed Amelia. I had made him look like a liar and a fool in front of his boss, his father-in-law, his entire world. This was the most important moment of my life, and you ruined it. You couldn't just be happy for me, could you? You had to make it all about you and your pathetic little contribution. Pathetic little contribution. The words hung in the air between us, uglier than any of his shouting. That was what he truly thought. It wasn't a sacrifice. It was a pittance he was ashamed of. When his breathing became ragged, when he finally ran out of steam, a heavy silence fell. I let it stretch, let him sit in the echo of his own venom. Then I spoke, and my voice was as quiet and level as a perfectly planed board. "Liam," I said, "I didn't make it about me. I made it about the truth." "The truth?" he scoffed, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Yes, the truth," I repeated firmly. "At your wedding, you made a choice. You chose to stand in front of everyone we know and participate in a lie. You took the memory of your mother, the physical result of my entire life's work, and you erased it because you were ashamed. You erased me. All I did, son, was put the truth back. I restored it. That's all." He started to sputter, to form another argument, but I wasn't finished. "Respect, Liam. It's not something you can buy from your new family. It's not something you get by pretending to be someone you're not. It's something you earn. And more importantly, it's something you are supposed to give to the people who built you. You forgot that." There was nothing but shocked silence on the other end of the line. Before he could find the words to rage or argue or justify himself any further, I said, "Goodbye, Liam," and gently hung up the phone. I had not raised my voice. I had not cursed. I had simply held up a mirror, and he had shattered it with his own fury. The call started the next day. First, a worried Clara. "Dad, Liam called me. He's a mess." I explained calmly what I had done and why. There was a long pause on her end. I could hear her breathing, thinking. Then she said, her voice soft but firm, "Good. I'm glad you did, Dad." He needed to hear it. Her validation was a balm on a wound that was finally beginning to heal. Then came calls from 2 of my old friends, men I'd worked alongside for decades, who had been at the wedding. They didn't pry. They just called to check in. One of them, a plumber named Sal, said it best. "Artie, I saw that kid of yours up there. Looked like he was trying to outrun his own shadow. A man who isn't proud of his roots has nothing to stand on." A strange lightness settled over me in the following weeks. The heavy cloak of shame and invisibility had been lifted. It wasn't joy, not yet, but it was a profound sense of rightness. I started spending more time in my garage. With the big machines gone, there was space. I bought a few hand tools, a good chisel, a coping saw, a block plane. I started making small things. I carved a little bluebird for the girl next door who had lost her cat. I built a sturdy bookshelf for the local library's children's section. The work was for its own sake, the simple pleasure of shaping wood, of creating something useful and beautiful with my own 2 hands. I started keeping a journal, writing down the story, not for anyone else, but to understand it myself. I kept one of the cards I had printed. I didn't frame it or display it. I placed it inside a small, dovetailed box I made from a scrap of walnut wood left over from an old project. In the box with the card, I put my favorite photograph of Martha and me, taken on our 25th anniversary. She was laughing, leaning against me. My hands, even then, were rough and worn. The box was not a trophy of revenge. It was a repository of my own value. A reminder that my worth was not determined by my son's approval, but by a lifetime of love and honest labor. News of Liam's life trickled in through Clara, who passed it along reluctantly. Mr. Thompson, as I had suspected, was a man who prized loyalty and image above all else. He was incandescent with rage, not at me, but at Liam. He was furious that Liam had put him in a position to look like a fool, to have his grand gesture revealed as only part of the story. The foundation of Liam and Amelia's marriage, built on that initial, glittering lie, was now riddled with cracks. Amelia felt deceived. Her trust in Liam was shaken. His position at his father-in-law's company, once so promising, was now tenuous and fraught with humiliation. The grand life he had purchased with his silence was proving to be a fragile and expensive thing. Several months passed. One Saturday, a car I didn't recognize pulled into my driveway. It was Liam. He looked thinner, his expensive suit hanging on him as if it belonged to another man. The arrogant fire in his eyes had been banked, replaced by a dull, exhausted embers. He tried to apologize. The words came out haltingly, wrapped in layers of self-pity and justification. I was under so much pressure. I didn't want to complicate things. Amelia's parents can be very particular. I was going to tell them eventually. I was going to pay you back. It was not an apology for the wound he had inflicted, but a lament for the consequences he was suffering. He was looking for a solution, for me to somehow undo the damage and make his life comfortable again. I listened patiently until he was finished. I didn't offer him absolution or anger. I went into my garage and came back with a small birdhouse I had just finished, painted a cheerful barn red. "This is for your garden," I said quietly, handing it to him. "It's important to have something real." He took it, looking confused, as if he'd been expecting a lecture or a checkbook. He left without another word. I thought that might be the end of it. But 2 weeks later, a small, plain envelope arrived in the mail. Inside was a single sheet of notepaper with a few lines written in Liam's hand. It said, "Dad, I am sorry. There is no excuse. I disrespected you. I disrespected Mom's memory, and I disrespected myself. I was wrong. There were no justifications, no pleas for help. It was just the simple, unvarnished truth. It was a start. A single, solid brick laid on new ground. My life has found a new rhythm now. My peace is my own, no longer held hostage by anyone else's approval. The anger is long gone, replaced by a quiet, settled calm. My relationship with Liam is rebuilding. It is slow, careful work, like joining two pieces of delicate, previously broken wood. It will never be what it was, but it might one day be something stronger, because it will be built on the truth." This morning, I was sitting in my backyard, watching a pair of wrens building a nest in the little red birdhouse I had given to my grandson, Clara's boy, Thomas. He came and sat on the grass beside me, his small hand finding mine. He looked from my calloused fingers to the carving tools beside me. "Grandpa," he said, his voice full of pure, uncomplicated awe, "Mom says you can build anything in the whole world. Can you teach me?" I looked at his bright, clear eyes, which saw me not as a success or a failure, not as a source of pride or shame, but simply as his grandfather, a man who could make things. In his eyes, I was not invisible. I was a hero, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that this was my true legacy. It was not in a bank account or a fancy wedding. It was here, in the passing of knowledge from my hands to his. I looked up at the great oak tree Martha and I had planted as a sapling all those years ago. Its roots ran deep and strong. Its branches reached for the sun, unafraid of any storm. A man must honor his roots, I thought. You can't build a life on borrowed soil. You have to stand on your own ground. I am Arthur Miller. I am a carpenter, and my foundation is, at last, unshakable.